Clara Bennett didn't live a grand life, but every part of her world was chosen with care and with heart. She taught creative writing at the local high school in Willow Cove, a lakeside town where everyone knew each other's birthdays, and the grocery clerk still asked how your grandmother was doing. Her house, a weathered cedar cabin tucked just beyond the birch trees, overlooked the still blue water. It wasn't much by city standards, but to Clara, it was more than enough. Her mornings began with paper and pen, the smell of rain on wood, and a mug of chamomile tea steeping beside half-written pages. Students called her Ms. Bennett, but outside the classroom, she was simply Clara, the woman who bought two of the same notebook every fall, just in case inspiration struck twice. She didn't go out much, didn't date, didn't long for adventure or noise. Her world was stitched together with quiet routines, early evening walks along the lakeshore, jazz records humming softly in the background, novels that remained half-read because she often preferred the thoughts they sparked more than the endings they offered. People mistook her stillness for sadness. It wasn't. Clara had made peace with her solitude. In a world that often confused motion with meaning, she had found something rare, contentment, and she wasn't looking for anything else. Not until the morning her phone lit up with a name she hadn't seen in far too long. "Can we talk tonight? It's important. My place, Miles." The words weren't many, but they landed like footsteps in a silent hallway, soft, but impossible to ignore. Clara stared at the screen, her heart stuttering just slightly, more from memory than emotion. The name Miles Carter stirred something inside her that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with history. They hadn't spoken in months, maybe more, but that had always been their rhythm. Quiet stretches punctuated by moments that seemed to carry more gravity than time should allow. And now here he was again, pulling her out of her stillness with just one message. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she set her tea down, stood barefoot on the wooden floor of her cabin, and looked out over the water. The surface was still, peaceful, much like her life. But some things, even the quietest ones, can still ripple. And Clara knew, even before she packed her bag and bought the train ticket to Seattle, that everything was about to change. Clara didn't answer the message, not right away. She stared at it until the screen dimmed, her thumb hovering over the glass as if even touching the reply box might unravel the quiet world she had built so carefully around herself. Miles Carter. Just reading his name was like opening a window you kept shut for years. Not because you wanted to forget, but because you didn't know if the air would feel the same anymore. Clara placed the phone face down on the kitchen counter, heart ticking a little faster than usual. She stood there for a long while, not moving, as the kettle began to whistle behind her, forgotten on the stove. She turned it off without pouring the tea. Somewhere between the stillness and the decision, a strange kind of knowing settled in her chest. She was going. Not out of obligation, not even out of curiosity, but because Miles had never used the word important lightly. By late afternoon, she had packed a small overnight bag, 2 changes of clothes, her journal, and a navy scarf she hadn't worn in years, the one Miles had wrapped around her neck the day her father died. The memory of that touch returned now, uninvited but welcome. The train left Willow Cove just after sunset, winding its way through misty pine forests and quiet mountain towns. Clara sat by the window, her hands tucked into her sleeves, eyes fixed on the shifting silhouettes of trees as they disappeared into the dusk. Seattle had always been a city of motion, glass towers, steel bridges, ambitions stitched into every skyline. It was Miles's world, not hers. While she wrote essays about the quiet heroism of small lives, he was presenting research on how the brain rewired itself after trauma. Brilliant, distant, restless. And yet somehow he had always remained hers, not in romance, but in something more enduring: constancy. She thought about the message again, the simplicity of it, the urgency, no pleasantries, no explanations. Just a soft knock on a door that had never really closed. By the time the train pulled into the station, the rain had thickened into mist. Clara stepped off, coat drawn tight, and breathed in the scent of a city that felt both foreign and faintly familiar. She didn't know what Miles was about to ask, but whatever it was, she knew it would matter. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent except for the soft hum of jazz playing somewhere through hidden speakers. Clara tightened her grip on her canvas bag, her fingers brushing against the frayed edge of her journal. Her reflection in the polished steel doors looked calm, but she could feel the tension humming just beneath her skin. When the elevator doors slid open, she was met with glass and light. Miles's apartment overlooked the city, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the glow of street lamps and blurred it into warmth. Everything was sleek, modern furniture, dark wood floors, gentle ambient lighting. It was the kind of place that whispered success. But Clara didn't care about the view or the design. She was looking for him. And there he was, standing barefoot in the kitchen, wrapped in a gray sweater that looked a size too big, a cold mug of coffee in his hand. He turned when he heard her step inside, offering a smile that was almost apologetic. Not polished, not perfect, raw. "Hey," he said softly, like the word had waited years to find its way out. Clara nodded once. "Hey." There was no hug, no dramatic reunion, just two people standing in the quiet, surrounded by the weight of unspoken things. He motioned toward the small dining table, already set with pasta, toasted bread, and two half-empty glasses of red wine. They sat, they ate, they talked about small things, her students, his latest research on memory regeneration, the weather in Willow Cove. For a while, it felt like any other time they'd reconnected, comfortable, familiar, until she set her fork down and he finally looked at her without looking away. "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I know it's going to sound strange." Clara's heart tightened. "Okay. I want a child," he said. "Not someday, now, and not with just anyone, with someone I trust." She blinked. He continued quickly, as if afraid the silence might swallow him. "I'm not asking for love or marriage. You know me. Relationships never work. They fall for the version of me that gives speeches and wears suits, not the one who forgets to eat or falls asleep reading research papers on the couch." He stood then, pacing slowly in front of the windows, the city lights flickering across his face. "But you've always seen past that. You've seen me. And I know this is huge. If you say no, nothing changes. We're still us, I promise." Clara sat still, her hands resting in her lap, a storm rising behind her eyes. Not because of what he'd asked, but because of how he'd asked, gently, carefully, like the question itself was sacred. And in that moment, she realized Miles Carter hadn't just come to her with an idea. He had come to her with his deepest vulnerability and trusted she wouldn't run. Clara met Miles Carter on a cold December afternoon behind the town library. She was 9. He had just moved to Willow Cove, and no one quite knew where to place him. The quiet boy with 2 big jackets, who never spoke unless called on, and always had a book in his lap that seemed older than he was. She found him sitting alone on a bench, legs pulled up, fingers hidden in sleeves, his breath fogging the air in small, deliberate puffs. There was something about the way he folded into himself that felt familiar. Like maybe he, too, understood what it meant to feel invisible in a room full of people. Clara didn't ask his name. She didn't ask why he was alone. She simply sat down beside him and unwrapped a square of milk chocolate from her coat pocket, something her grandmother had slipped into her lunch that morning. "I brought 2, she said softly, even though she hadn't. She placed it on the space between them. Miles didn't answer, But 5 minutes later, as she quietly began humming the tune of a commercial jingle stuck in her head, he reached out, broke the chocolate in half, and took a piece. That was all it took. From that moment on, they were something. Not quite friends the way kids usually define it, but something truer. They didn't talk much in public. They didn't sit together at lunch or pass notes. But after school, they found each other. In the library aisles, on the back steps of the bookstore, in silence. They shared notebooks filled with half-written short stories. Miles drew diagrams in the margins. Clara turned them into strange, wonderful tales. She'd leave sticky notes inside his books. This line made me think of you. Try writing the ending backward. Page 87 is the best one yet. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but it was theirs. Then came the summer when everything changed. Miles was 16 when his mother collapsed in the back of her bookstore and never woke up again. An aneurysm, no warning, no goodbye. Clara found out from a friend at the grocery store, "There are ambulances at Carter's Books. Something's wrong." She didn't hesitate. By the time she reached the hospital, Miles was sitting alone in the waiting room, his shoulders stiff, hands clenched together like if he let go, everything around him would fall apart. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. Clara sat beside him. She didn't ask what happened, didn't tell him everything would be okay. She simply reached over, slid her hand into his and stayed. For 3 hours. No words, just presence, just her. And in that stillness, somewhere between sorrow and breath, they became something unshakable. Not a couple, not yet, but something rarer. Two souls who had quietly chosen each other long before either of them realized the choice had a name. Clara didn't say yes. She didn't say no either. She simply sat there, wrapped in the hum of a quiet apartment and the weight of a question she hadn't seen coming. Miles didn't press. He just nodded, gently cleared the dishes, and let the silence fill in where words couldn't. When she left that night, he walked her to the door, hands tucked into the sleeves of his sweater, eyes soft but unreadable. The train ride back to Willow Cove felt longer than it had coming in. That night, Clara didn't sleep. For 3 days, she wandered through her routines like a ghost in her own life, feeding the stray cat that lingered near her porch, sorting through student essays, watching the light change across her living room walls. But nothing felt settled. The question Miles had asked echoed inside her, not because it was outrageous, but because it wasn't. Because deep down, beneath the shock and the what-ifs, there was something quieter growing in her. Trust. And she knew she couldn't carry it alone. So on the 4th morning, Clara filled a thermos with ginger tea, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and walked to the edge of town, where a gray cottage sat beneath an old maple tree. The porch steps creaked as she approached. Miss Everly opened the door before Clara could knock. "Thought you might come," the retired principal said with a soft smile. They sat outside, the lake wind catching dry leaves in its path, and for the first time, Clara said it all out loud. No filters, no poetry, just the truth. Miles, the question, the ache of not knowing, the fear of ruining something precious. Miss Everly listened the way only someone who had known Clara since she was 13 could, with stillness and understanding. When Clara finally stopped, Miss Everly reached over, placed her hand on Clara's, and said, "Love doesn't always begin with fireworks, Clara. Sometimes it starts with a door left open and a trust that chooses to walk through it." Clara didn't reply, but she didn't look away either. A week later, she returned to Seattle. No warning, no luggage, just a notebook in her bag and a steadying breath. When Miles opened the door and saw her standing there, he froze. Clara looked him straight in the eyes. "We'll do this," she said, "but we do it together, as friends, as partners." They didn't rush. The morning after Clara returned to Seattle, they sat on the balcony of Miles's apartment with warm mugs of tea and a silence that no longer felt uncertain. The air between them had changed. Not heavier, not lighter, just more honest. By the end of that week, they began the process. Consultations, medical exams, referrals to clinics with 2 white walls and careful brochures stacked in neat rows. Clara kept a notebook with her at every appointment, jotting down questions in tiny, tidy handwriting. Miles came to every visit, sometimes canceling meetings last minute, sometimes arriving breathless from his lab. He never let her walk in alone. They learned quickly that this journey was more than biology. It was decision after decision. Hormone levels, timing cycles, donation options, legal documents. Miles handled the logistics, Clara, the emotions. And somehow the space between them became something safe. An unspoken agreement that whatever happened next, they wouldn't face it separately. When Clara grew anxious, Miles took her for long drives past the edges of the city, down winding tree-lined roads where the world slowed down. He'd stop at roadside fruit stands or pull over so she could sketch the landscape in her notebook. Sometimes they didn't talk, but she always came back steadier. One afternoon, after a difficult consultation, Miles brought her back to Willow Cove. They walked along the lake where they used to skip stones as kids, the water catching late summer light like glass. "You okay?" he asked as she paused by the dock. Clara didn't answer right away. She looked at the horizon, then back at him. "I don't know what I expected this to feel like," she said, "but I didn't think it would feel this fragile." Miles nodded. "It is, but you're not." He reached for her hand, not tightly, not possessively, just enough to remind her, "You're not doing this alone." That night back at the apartment, Clara pulled out her notebook again, not for medical notes this time, but for something more personal. She flipped to a clean page and, for the first time since saying yes, began to write, "This isn't love, not yet, but it might be something even stronger. It's trust that didn't flinch when asked to hold a life." Clara had braced herself for the waiting. She had prepared for the hormone injections, the ultrasounds, the silence in waiting rooms. She had read articles, listened to specialists, and nodded at statistics meant to soften the blow before it ever came. But nothing prepares you for the sound of no, especially when it arrives in the form of a flat, expressionless voice over the phone. The results came back negative. "We're sorry." She didn't cry, not right away. Instead, she sat alone in her kitchen in Willow Cove, the windows fogged with late October air, her palms resting over her belly. Not in pain, just in instinct, as if holding something that had never even had the chance to stay. There was no physical ache, just the slow unraveling of hope, like threads coming loose from the inside out. That evening, Miles called. He didn't ask how she was. He already knew. "I made ginger soup," he said softly. "It's not great, but it's warm." She almost smiled. She didn't know why she agreed to take the late train back to Seattle that night. Maybe it was the soup. Maybe she just couldn't carry the weight alone anymore. It was raining when she arrived. Not a storm, just a steady, curtain-like drizzle, the kind that plays against windows like a quiet song on repeat. Miles met her at the door in an old sweater and house slippers. He didn't say a word, just stepped aside and let her in. He handed her tea, put on a jazz record, sat beside her on the couch. They watched a movie neither of them would remember, the flickering light from the screen casting soft shadows on the walls. "I thought I'd feel different," Clara whispered, eyes on nothing. "But I just feel empty." Miles didn't respond right away. Then he turned to her, his voice barely more than breath. "You're not empty. You're carrying more courage than most people ever touch. Even if no one sees it, I do." She laughed, broken and small, like something inside her had cracked, and maybe needed to. Then at last the tears came, not from failure, but from finally being seen. They didn't plan for it. There was no dramatic turn, no sudden pull. Just a quiet evening after a long day, when the city lights outside the window blurred softly into gold, and the warmth between them became something neither could ignore anymore. Clara sat on the couch, legs curled beneath her, reading through old thank you notes from her students. Miles was beside her, flipping absently through pages of her journal she had trusted him enough to share. The silence felt full, but not heavy, like a room finally at peace with itself. She looked over at him, and in the space of that glance, something shifted. It wasn't a question. It wasn't permission. It was understanding. Miles reached for her hand, not with urgency, but reverence. He brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers trembling slightly as if he were afraid she might pull away. "Tell me to stop," he said softly, his voice close and careful. Clara didn't. Instead, she leaned in, just enough. Their kiss was slow, unrushed, as if the moment itself had been waiting patiently, tucked away in the quiet corners of every shared silence, every late-night phone call, every moment they'd chosen each other without saying so. It wasn't about desire, not entirely. It was about knowing. Knowing this was not a mistake, not a detour, but perhaps the place they'd both been walking toward all along. That night they made love not because of timing or plans or next steps, but because they finally had nothing left to fear. No words were exchanged, no declarations, only presence, only trust, only the feeling that something sacred was unfolding between them, delicate but steady. Weeks passed. Life returned to its gentle rhythms. Clara commuting between Willow Cove and Seattle, Miles balancing research deadlines with doctor visits. But something inside Clara had changed. She felt it before she knew it. A stillness in the morning, a tenderness in her breath, a hum beneath her skin that wasn't anxiety, but anticipation. One quiet afternoon in her small bathroom back home, she took a test. Alone, no needles, no clinic, no scheduled window. Just a heartbeat of hope she hadn't dared to name. When the result appeared, 2 lines, clear and unmistakable, she didn't cry right away. She smiled and then she trembled. Not from fear, but from awe. This time it was real. This time it was hers. She didn't text him. She didn't call. Clara simply got in the car and drove. The pregnancy test lay tucked inside a velvet pouch, one she had found in a box of her grandmother's things. It smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. Somehow it felt right, sacred even. The sky was painted in twilight by the time she reached Seattle, her hands trembling lightly on the steering wheel. The kind of trembling that comes not from fear, but from the weight of something too big for words. When Miles opened the door, he froze. She stood on the threshold, cheeks flushed, wind in her hair, eyes red, not from sorrow, but from something far deeper. He took a step forward. "Clara, what's wrong?" She didn't answer. Instead, she held out the pouch. Miles looked at her for a moment, then gently took it. He untied the drawstring with cautious fingers, and when he saw what was inside, the world stilled. A pregnancy test. 2 lines. Undeniable. His breath caught. It's not from the clinic?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Clara shook her head. "It just happened." For a moment, he said nothing, just stared at her like the entire universe had narrowed down to this. This woman, this moment, this impossible truth. Then slowly he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. Not tightly, just enough. "You're pregnant," he said softly, reverently. "You're really carrying our child." Clara pressed her forehead against his shoulder, her voice muffled by the fabric of his shirt. "I didn't know how to feel at first," she whispered. "I was scared. Scared it would change us. Ruin what we had." Miles pulled back just enough to see her face. "Clara, this doesn't ruin anything." He paused. "In fact, It makes something very, very clear. He took a breath and for the first time in all their years, let it out as truth. I love you. She didn't respond right away. She just looked at him, really looked, not as the boy who had once sat alone behind the library, not as the friend who always showed up, but as the man standing in front of her now, unguarded, raw, and entirely real. And then softly, as her tears returned, me too. I think I've loved you for a very long time. News travels fast in small towns. Clara didn't know who first saw her stepping out of the black SUV in front of the school, or who noticed the soft curve just beginning to show beneath her sweater. But within days, she could feel it. The shift, the sideways glances in the grocery store, the quiet hush when she entered the staff lounge, the polite but distant smiles that had once been warm. No one said anything to her face. They didn't have to. Whispers filled the air like dust on old floorboards. She was always so private, and now this? Do you think it was planned? Must be someone with money. That car doesn't scream high school teacher. No one asked about Miles. No one knew the years behind the decision. They only saw the surface and wrote their own version of her story. During the next parent meeting at school, a mother spoke just loudly enough for the others to hear. Is it appropriate for someone in her condition to continue teaching? The room went still. Clara didn't flinch, but inside something cracked, not because of the question, but because of the silence that followed it. The next morning, the principal called her in. I'm so sorry, she said, voice laced with hesitation. Some families are uneasy. Maybe a short leave could give things time to settle. Clara nodded, not because she agreed, but because she understood. That afternoon, she sat on the porch of her cabin, a letter of leave resting in her lap, the lake quiet behind her. Miles arrived without needing to be called. He sat beside her, read the letter, and his jaw tightened. I'll handle this, he said. They don't get to shame you for... Don't, she cut in, gently but firm. If you fight this with power and noise, they'll say I hid behind you. I don't want that. He reached for her hand. You shouldn't have to walk through this alone. I know, she said, but I need them to see my strength, not just yours. Miles was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Then let's show them. No hiding, no apologies. You don't owe this town a version of you that fits their comfort. And for the first time in weeks, Clara finally believed it. That Sunday, Clara didn't stay home. She dressed in a soft gray dress that hugged her growing belly gently, wrapped her green scarf around her shoulders, and waited by the front door as Miles pulled up outside her cottage. He stepped out, adjusted his collar, and offered his hand without a word. She took it. Together, they walked up the worn stone steps of the church Clara had attended as a child, where she once recited poems at Christmas and sang hymns in a voice too small for the front row. Now every eye turned. People shifted in pews. Some whispered, some stared. A few smiled tentatively. But Miles didn't waver. He held her hand firmly, not as a shield, but as a choice. Not to protect her, but to stand beside her. When the pastor asked if anyone had something to share, Miles stood. No podium, no prepared speech, just him. I used to think I knew what mattered, he said simply, voice steady but low. That success lived in titles or awards, but I was wrong. He turned slightly toward Clara, and something in his gaze softened. The most important things in life are built in patience, in the people who stay when it's not easy, in those who see you not for what you do, but who you are. I found that. I'm not hiding it. He sat back down. Clara's hand trembled in his, but she didn't let go. That night, lying curled beside him, she whispered into the hush of their shared breath, I won't shrink to fit inside anyone's small version of me. Miles smiled, resting his hand gently over her belly. You were never meant to shrink. You were made to shine. It wasn't grand, No sweeping staircase, no marble countertops or sprawling gardens. But when Miles pulled into the driveway of the little house tucked just outside Seattle, Clara felt something catch in her chest. The siding was soft cream, the shutters a faded ocean blue. A red maple tree stood watch out front, its leaves gathering like whispers along the porch steps. Miles, whose house is this? He turned off the engine and looked at her, nervous and proud all at once. Ours, he said quietly. I bought it, not because I thought we needed something big, just something that's ours, a place to begin. Clara didn't answer right away. She stepped out of the car and took it in. The porch swing, the crooked mailbox, the gentle slope of the roof like a shrug of comfort. It wasn't perfect, which somehow made it feel more real. Inside, the walls smelled of fresh paint and something warm. Miles led her through each room, speaking softly. I thought this could be the nursery, he said, opening the door to a small sunlit space. Clara stood in the middle of it, one hand instinctively resting on her belly. We should name him, she said. Miles turned toward her. Do you have one in mind? She nodded slowly. Rowan. Rowan Bennett Carter, he repeated, as if testing the shape of the future. She smiled. More from me, more from you. So he always remembers where he comes from. Miles wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hand joining hers over the quiet life growing between them. And in that moment, surrounded by unpacked boxes and unopened windows, the house stopped being a place. It became a home. That evening, after they returned to the apartment in Seattle, Miles asked Clara to meet him on the rooftop. The sky was tinted gold, city lights beginning to blink awake. A breeze tugged gently at her coat as she stepped outside, and there he was, standing beneath strings of warm light he had hung earlier that day. The city stretched behind him, but he only looked at her. In his hands was a small velvet box. I know we didn't start this with romance, he said, voice steady but tender. We built this on trust, on history, on choosing each other, quietly again and again. He took a breath. But this, what we've become, Clara, it's love, real love. And I don't want to go another day without calling you my family. Her eyes welled before he could even kneel. Her voice broke as she added, I've been waiting for this too, maybe even longer than you have. Miles smiled, dropping to one knee. Clara Bennett, he said, will you marry me? Not because of Rowan, not because of obligation, but because you are the dream I never dared to draw. She laughed through tears. Yes, she said, 1,000 times yes. And somewhere above the city, beneath lights both man-made and divine, a new chapter quietly began. It was a rainy morning, not the kind of storm that rattled windows, but the kind that wrapped the world in a soft gray hush, like the sky itself was holding its breath. Clara was 38 weeks along when the first contraction hit. Subtle at first, a quiet cramp low in her belly. Then another, stronger, sharper. She stood by the kitchen counter, gripping the edge until her knuckles whitened. Miles appeared in seconds, eyes wide, voice steady. It's time, isn't it? She nodded, barely able to speak. The hospital bag was already packed. The car waited just outside. During the drive, Miles never let go of her hand, whispering calm between her sharp, broken breaths. You've done harder things, he told her softly, forehead pressed to hers. You chose to love. You chose to stay. You chose this life. You are braver than anyone I've ever known. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Hours later, under dim lights and the steady rhythm of her own heart, Clara pushed through the pain and the fear, through the fire in her body and the noise in her mind, until the room was filled with one sound only, a baby's cry. The nurse placed a tiny boy on her chest, warm, wrinkled, perfect. Miles stood frozen for a second. then stepped forward, breath catching. "Rowan," he whispered, "welcome to the world." Clara looked down at their son, her hand cupping his back. And in that moment, sweaty, exhausted, radiant, she knew this wasn't the end of something. It was the most honest beginning she had ever known. The first week home was chaos. Diapers, bottle warmers, late-night cries that echoed down quiet hallways. Sleep came in fragments, and meals were eaten standing up. Clara moved through it all, like someone relearning the rhythm of life. One breath, one heartbeat, one lullaby at a time. But there was joy, too. Quiet, undeniable joy. Every evening, Miles held Rowan to his chest, letting the newborn rest against the steady beat of his heart. Clara would sit beside them, reading aloud from old storybooks. Even though Rowan didn't understand the words, it didn't matter. The sound of her voice, soft and sure, seemed to calm them all. They didn't do everything right, but they did everything together. One night, when the world outside had gone still and Rowan was finally asleep in his crib, Clara curled into Miles's side on the couch. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I said no?" Miles turned to her, gently brushing a finger across her cheek. "I think," he said, "there would have always been a space in my chest I couldn't explain. And Rowan wouldn't have the gentlest mother in the world." Clara smiled, eyes shining. "I didn't say yes because you asked." She paused. "I said yes because deep down I knew you were already home." Outside the window, the wind shifted the chimes softly. Inside, 3 heartbeats moved in quiet harmony. Not perfect, but complete. And now, with their son asleep in the next room and love folded into the quiet of their lives, home wasn't just a place, it was them.